A lot of people want to feel more confident or develop a higher level of confidence for dealing with conflict, but it's not always easy to know where to start. So, in this conversation, we talk about some of the ways that workplace conflict and managing difficult conversations relate to our inherent nervous system, our hardwiring as humans. And we talk about some strategies for keeping yourselves calm, and then options for being assertive and holding the line with clients, all the while not coming across as too aggressive or overbearing. So if that sounds like the kind of thing that's useful for you, please consider giving it a listen. I'm Simon Goode, and you're listening to The Future.
Okay, my next guest piqued my curiosity because he says, Chris, you do something called preemptive empathy. I'm like, what is that? He goes, I'm a specialist in conflict resolution. Well, I love the way that sounds because so many in our community, including myself, struggle with conflict in our personal relationships, conflict in negotiations, pricing, buying a car, whatever it is, there's conflict around us everywhere. And we don't know how to process that. We don't know how to respond. We tend to wind up on the losing end of that equation. So let's tune in here and let's have this conversation with Simon. Simon, how are you?
Hello, Chris. I'm really well. Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show.
Let's dive into it. I know you've got an MBA and also a degree in psychology, and you're a specialist at facilitating mediation and conflict resolution. That sounds like something that we all should get better at. And so I want to learn from you. Where should we go?
When I normally deliver conflict resolution trainings in full, these are the topics that I usually tend to cover. So I normally talk about conflict analysis, like how we can understand conflict, the contextual factors and the individual factors that drive conflict. Then we look at self-regulation and staying calm. Now, for me, that's kind of the essential foundation that we need to build, because if we become escalated, if we become frazzled and either angry and a little bit enraged or afraid and a little bit panicked and flustered, then it's going to reduce our capacity to think clearly, like literally in our brain. And I can explain this if it's helpful, the fight or flight response that we go into and the changes that happen. But effectively what we're doing is jumping to short-term solutions based on a perception of threat. So if we can calm ourselves down, it increases our ability to think clearly, which then lets us respond to a situation, for example, as opposed to getting sucked into a reaction. So I thought that could be one of the helpful topics to touch on in the conversation today, if that would be okay with you. And then I normally go from there to de-escalation, like how we can calm clients down, for example, when they're upset, a staff member if you're having a performance management conversation with them, and then empathetic listening. Those, to me, seem to be particular strengths that you have, Chris, and I wonder if maybe they could be areas that we wouldn't focus on as much today. The other area that I thought we could focus on was assertiveness skills. So I normally talk about de-escalation and empathy, so calming the other person down, then exploring what's their concern, what are they upset about, what are they wanting in this situation, and then we need to decide if this is the kind of conversation where we need to hold on to the boundaries and hold the line, etc., then we need the tools to be assertive. And where I've noticed that design professionals often struggle is in the self-regulation space and in the assertiveness kind of space. They tend to be a little bit more conflict avoidant, I think, than other professionals. You know, I do a lot of training in the construction sector and they're not usually conflict avoidant. They tend to go for the jugular from the word go. So I've got some practical tools that might be helpful for assertiveness, like how you can raise an issue and minimize the defensiveness and resistance that might come up. And then ultimately how we can, escalate the level of assertiveness to the point where we're giving them an ultimatum. Like if you don't pay this invoice, the project's going to be put on hold, that kind of thing. So if it's okay with you, those are the two areas that I thought we could cover. But I just wanted to explain that it's within the context of understanding the broader factors that contribute to conflict.
I want to share something with you kind of as a very personal story, trying to ground some of this concept, right? I feel like I'm well tuned now to deal with very stressful situations, probably above the tolerance level of most people. So I'm dealing with Fortune 500 companies. I'm dealing with advertising agencies. I'm dealing with big personalities everywhere, people who are stars and superstars. And you kind of have to learn how to navigate that without being a doormat. And so things that I do stress my wife out. She literally looks at my calendar and just sees all the things that's scheduled, like podcast, interview, webinar, public speaking, whatever it is that I'm doing. And she's stressed out. She goes, "Are you going to be okay?" I'm like, "What's wrong? Did something bad happen?" She goes, No. I just looked at your calendar. I'm like, "Please don't look at it. Because when you start stressing out, I start stressing out and I'm okay. So here's what we noticed recently. I was traveling with my children. We're overseas, so we weren't home. And my wife elected to stay home. She had been traveling a lot and she's fatigued. And during this time, a couple like really bad things had happened. Number one, we got these 100-mile-per-hour winds that were going through. And that was also the catalyst for these crazy fires that swept through LA.
Mm,
And she was here by herself. And
gosh.
so there's already a very high level of stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when it was safe to return home, basically she saw debris, trees down, things in the pool, and it looked like a cesspool a little bit because weeks before the winds came, she had turned off the water filter because the pool was leaking water.
Mm,
And in her mind, she explained it to me, it was going to cost a couple $1,000 to just clear this thing out because last time we left the pool in this state, it was a very expensive thing. So she goes, I
mm,
want to fix the pool. I want to fix the leak. I want to get this all done. And she made a series of like strange decisions.
mm,
This goes to the fact that when we're stressed out, when we're under pressure, we're
mm.
not using the full capacity of our brain,
Right.
that we're making decisions that may or may not be good because she literally hired someone who tore the pool apart to not find the leak.
Oh gosh.
So now we have an unusable pool, we have debris everywhere, and we're
Yeah.
just diving deeper into a money pit, I think. I think the
Mm-hmm.
story has a happy ending. It's not over, so we'll just park it there. But I just noticed, I said, honey, remember next time you start to feel this anxiety and this stress, calm yourself down so you can use that beautiful brain of yours. Otherwise, we're going to make bad decisions. So I
Yeah.
think that leads into this whole regulating stress, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think she was feeling in that moment? Was it fear or just overwhelm or like how would she describe it, do you think?
I think she would say all the above. I think she was thinking about the money that was being spent. She was
Mm,
thinking about the problem compounding because the longer it waits without the filter running, the
mm,
nastier the water gets. And we were told at some point black mold will grow, and it's
mm,
much
mm.
harder to get rid of black mold than it is just to get standard mold. And so it's the leaking, the wasting of the water, and just this problem needs to end. It needs to be solved correctly.
Oh, it's so challenging. And you see the same kind of thing playing out in workplace situations as well. Like somebody tells their boss to F off or something like that, or you hang up on a client in the middle of a conversation, or you delay responding to an email because you're so anxious and you're not sure how to word it correctly. And then it delays and delays and delays, and the anxiety builds up and builds up. So self regulation, and you gave your wife that advice of figure out a way to calm yourself down. And does she know how to? Like, does she have techniques that work for her for that self-regulation aspect?
I think so because she does a lot of meditation. She's a
Mm,
very spiritual person.
mm.
But I was like, it's just water. It's just a pool. Like doesn't even register my stress out meter. Because there's this line that I heard from Blair Enns. I'm not sure if he's the originator of this line, but it basically goes something like this. If you can write a check to solve a problem, you really don't have a problem.
Interesting.
So we're very privileged to be in a place where most of our quote unquote problems can be solved quite easily because we just sign a check. But
Yeah,
she doesn't like that. She's like, no, I don't like the way we spend money. I'm like, okay, well, then we choose to hold on to the problem. And
yeah,
maybe there's a good reason she does that. Maybe I'm too much of like a spending spree, like, well, just hire the best person and get them to do this and do
right.
it the best way always.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I've met people like yourself that have this incredible capacity to stay calm, even in these very high pressure situations. And then others, and to be frank, like myself, I'm a lot more naturally flustered and a lot more naturally nervous, and I overthink things and I'm constantly rehearsing conversations and replaying things that happened. So self regulation has been a real challenge for me. And I knew I needed to calm down, and my bosses were telling me, you need to find a way to calm down, but I couldn't. And so for me, self-regulation, the key has been to understand what we mean by the self. And I've drawn one of the aspects that is from Buddhism. Buddha talked about these 5 aspects of self. Buddha actually said this isn't just the 5 aspects of self, like you are more than this. But I think these 5 aspects are incredibly helpful when we think about how to regulate our nervous system. So when your wife came home and she saw the debris in the pool, she would have had this reaction, and it occurs in these 5 different dimensions of us, of the self. The feeling is often the tip of the iceberg, and that's what comes up first. The panic and the fear or the anger, or even anger at yourself, like I shouldn't have forgotten to switch the pump off or whatever it was. Like, so that feeling is there. But the interesting thing, like when I said, what was she feeling? There's a lot more nuance in amongst these emotions than a lot of us expect. I'm angry. Well, that's not the entire story, is it? Like, I'm not just angry. And if I'm angry at someone that didn't pay an invoice, that's different to angry at my son when he leaves his plate, without cleaning up after himself or something. There's so many different variations of anger. So for me, I tend to find it not that helpful to just focus on the feeling like anger. What tends to be more helpful for managing it is what's called emotional granularization, where we break that anger apart into the different pieces. Like, how come I'm angry? What else am I feeling? This kind of thing. So you certainly have that emotional reaction, and that comes up very often in workplace conflict as well. When I'm doing mediations, that's what I'm paying attention to first and foremost. But your wife would have also had a physical reaction to that. Her heart rate might have slightly increased, for example. Her fists might have clenched. She might have been shaking slightly or felt the need to pace back and forth, this buildup of adrenaline. This is all because of this fight or flight mechanism that we're effectively hardwired for as humans. Like, we've lived for so many thousands and thousands of years in tribal societies. So when there's a problem that comes up and when there's something that we think there's a threat, we're used to having a physical response. So for your wife, not being able to think clearly, her heart racing and that buildup of adrenaline and feeling the need to rush and jump in to take action might have also contributed to it. So we've got the feelings, then we've got our physical body. These are the first two parts of ourself. Then we've got our thoughts, our consciousness, like the story that we're telling ourselves about the situation, the assumption she was making, the black mold and how much it was going to cost, this kind of thing. Then we've got our perception, what we're paying attention to and what we're focusing on. Like when your wife came and saw the pool, I can only imagine that everything else drifted out of her peripheral vision. Like she was just looking at the pool and trying to figure out the problems and what's caused it. She wasn't remembering what the kids were doing or what the groceries were sitting on the bench and that kind of thing. Especially when we're in conflict, when there's a high level of perceived threat, our perception adjusts and becomes hyper-focused on the thing that we think we need to deal with. So those are the first four aspects: our emotions, our physical body, our thoughts, our perception, what we're paying attention to. And then we've got our behavior. That's that, what do you feel like you need to do? The urges, the whims that come up kind of thing. Like, I just can't believe it. You want to throw the phone on the ground, or, do you know what I mean? Like these little completely illogical inclinations that we have when we get upset. And all of those five aspects give us indications that we are becoming escalated. Like, as I'm becoming more escalated, my thinking changes, my feeling changes, my body changes, my perception changes, and my behavior changes. And these are also five options that we've got for regulating ourselves in those kind of situations. So I can look at my emotions and do the emotional granularization process that I talked about. I can deal with my physical body, go and have a shower, have something to eat, go for a walk, something like that. I can deal with my thoughts. Am I catastrophizing this problem? Maybe I don't have all of the information. Maybe I don't need to make this decision right now. Maybe I can change my behavior. Like, don't blurt out the thing that I want to say. Don't do the destructive task that I want to do. Just sit still for a minute and let that pass, or do a different kind of behavior that's going to be more helpful, like talking to my husband about what he thinks we should do, or getting a consultant in to give us some, advice. Or we can adjust our perception. Instead of just focusing on the thing that's causing us this stress, and because we're seeing it as a perceived threat, we focus on something else, a mindfulness activity, going to a different task that's productive, that kind of thing. So for me, that's really been the key to figuring out how to keep myself calm when I'm in difficult conversations, like running a workplace mediation, for example. And I wonder if maybe for some of the people listening, that might also be helpful if they've struggled to calm down, if you know what I mean, just themselves through sheer, what would you say, like force of will or something like that. So for me, this has really been part of how I think about developing emotional intelligence as part of conflict. We really need to develop the self-awareness, and understanding those five aspects of self has been the key for that for me. And I often talk about this in the training workshops that I run, and I get, people that say this really resonates with them. That then lets us do the self-regulation that we need to do. Like, I don't know how to calm myself down if I'm not sure what's going on within me. And then that leads to the awareness of others. This is often what we're aiming for when we think about difficult conversations or conflict. Like, you might want to calm your wife down in that situation, but of course you would need to be calm yourself first. And we need to be aware of what's going on in someone else's mind if we're going to be able to have a positive influence on them. So that's sort of the way that it often develops. People might come, I have a podcast called Conflict Skills, and you might look at an episode on assertiveness or something. And I can talk to you about a formula, like say these three things or use this technique or this phrase really works. But if you're not able to keep yourself calm in the middle of the conversation, there's really no point to it. So for me, it's the self-awareness, self-regulation that then leads to the awareness of others, which then contributes to us being able to have a positive influence. And it's really just understanding that this is the way that we're wired. This immediate reaction that we have, it's about the past. It's about the learnings that we've done, the programming through all of the different experiences that we've had through our early upbringing and school and early career. That's about the past. Your immediate reaction does not tell you who you are. It's how you decide to respond after the reaction that gives you real insight into how much you've grown. Your first reaction is your past. Your intentional response is your present. It's from a book called Insight by Jung Pueblo, and he really has an incredible way of articulating some of these different bits and pieces, I think. So I mentioned that part of the reason why, like your wife might have responded to that situation, for example, is the hardwiring that we have. And it's through this process of evolution. If we think about like 1,000 years ago, Christo's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather living in a tribe of around 120 kind of people, like you're out getting food and there's tasks to be done, but a lot of the time there's no imminent danger. We tend to only feel stress in specific situations. It's when someone's going to attack us, or we're out looking for food and we come across a wild animal that's going to eat us or something like that. And the threats that our ancestors faced have been very real. Like it has been someone who's going to physically attack you and they might hurt you. So we've got this response, which is predominantly physical. We get ready to defend ourselves through fight or flight, run away. So in terms of the chemistry of our brain, we've got these high doses of cortisol, which is the stress hormone that our brain creates. It tends to make us feel a bit on edge if you've got a whole lot of that sort of pumping through your system. And adrenaline in situations where there's danger. And it's like we can ramp up all of the resources to short-term survival because that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. The challenge is that these days we're not really wired for the modern working environment. If you're working as a design consultant, for example, like you're on call almost 24/7. You're often checking your phone. Most people, the first thing that they do is log in and check their emails and that kind of thing. So we're constantly on alert to potential threats, things that we might perceive as challenges to our safety, so to speak. And so what happens is that our brain tends to associate the ping of a notification or the unread email symbol on your desktop or something like that with a potential threat. And it triggers a little bit of this fight or flight response. So what's going on are these low doses of cortisol constantly flowing through our system, which effectively in long term means that our immune system can become compromised, for example. But it also means that even in a given workday, if you've gone from one meeting into the next meeting into the next meeting, you're not walking in at a 0 out of 10. Like you're walking in at a 7 out of 10, for example. So it's not going to take as much to push your buttons and set you off, given that buildup of cortisol. And that stays in our system for a lot longer than people realize. It's actually up to 18 hours. So, the old saying of sleep on it, you'll feel better in the morning or something like that. There's a lot of I think a lot of wisdom behind that because it would allow some of that cortisol to be released and go through your system. So I talked about this perceived threat, and historically it's been like someone who wants to attack me or an animal that wants to attack me. But of course, we're not just programmed to respond to physical threats. And even with our tribal ancestors, there were other things that were potentially hazardous for their survival as well. So we've got the physical danger. We do go into this fight or flight response when we're in physical danger. If you're going back to your car after a dinner at a restaurant and someone's following you, you do find your heart rate starts increasing. You worry that you're going to get mugged and they might attack you. So that could be caused by explicit threats or pain, or even something like someone invading your space and standing very close, or interrupting you or pushing you around and not having any sense of control over a situation, or putting a mask on and not knowing where you're being led. It could be social risks, though. These are also things that our brain interprets as perceived threats. Things like embarrassment, or being singled out in a group, or a loss of reputation, or being criticized in front of others. So some people, and I'm sure people listening to this would say, I just feel like I'm being silly. I'm overreacting. Why am I such a drama queen? Do you know what I mean? Like, why can't I just be Chris Doe and just be cool and calm and collected in the face of challenges? Well, the answer is that you're not programmed to do that. Like, we are programmed to live in tribes and maintain tribal harmony. So embarrassment and being singled out and even conflict, these are things that we inherently are driven to avoid. It could also be caused by discomfort. This can also trigger that fight or flight kind of reaction. It might be physical exertion. You've got someone that's really tired and you're asking them to do one more thing, or you're in a meeting and you're really busting to go to the toilet and someone asks another question and, oh, for goodness sakes, are you serious? Or it could be uncertainty, especially a lack of control or an unexpected change. And even for people who are able to manage the first three categories, and I wonder if this is something that you might even find challenging, Chris, when there's a sense of lack of control, or you know that there's a problem, but you don't have the full information about it, that's often something that causes some people to escalate too. So when I talk about that fight or flight response, we have a very physical reaction, like we're getting ready for physical activity, but the causes aren't just physical, which means that we might need to kind of become aware of what our reaction is and manage it, like calm ourselves down and then choose a different kind of response.
I have a question.
Yes.
So as our society has evolved and progressed, the physical threats that we once felt just 100 years ago are less and less. We don't walk down the street worrying that much that somebody's going to stab us or shoot us with a bow and arrow or something like that. But that was a very real thing before. So my question for you is, from an evolutionary point of view, have we transferred the fear, the flight or fight thing, towards more abstract things as we move up higher, Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We've moved away from physical safety, and then eventually move towards identity and self-actualization. So the fear that people might think I'm stupid challenges our own identity. And so that's a different kind of fear now. So if that's the case, I have a follow-up question, but what are your thoughts on that before I ask my follow-up question?
I don't know that that is necessarily true, because I think that even back when we were worried about bows and arrows shooting us, we also needed to worried about being singled out within our tribe. And we also needed to be worried about someone criticizing our hunting techniques or something like that. So I don't know that all of those other threats that we have these days weren't there in the old days.
Right.
But I do think you're right that we don't have as much of the physical threat. So our brain has shifted to focus on, and it might be connected to Maslow's hierarchy, or there's like, the tribe. We used to have 120 people that we could see and touch and we knew how they were. But these days we have this, virtual tribe almost that we're worried about looking bad in front of. Like, something happens online and we feel embarrassed about it. Like, we don't really know those people, but it's almost like our brain is, taking one of the normal responses that's worked for us, and it's unfortunately transposing it into a situation that doesn't work for us. But that ego, like, we can focus more on becoming the kind of person that I want to be, and then maybe the threats that come stop us from getting there, and maybe that might be something that triggers us into the fight or flight. I'm not so sure.
Okay. I thought about that when I was asking the question, because I was thinking, if you and I and 8 others were in a tribe and we're looking for food and we're hunting in the jungle somewhere, there's always questions about, like, you lead the pack. Are you strong enough to protect our rear? And there's always questions about fitting into the social structure and things like that. So we need to belong, otherwise we'll get left behind. We need to prove we're useful to this team, my teammates of hunters or whatever it is. So I understand that. It just feels like we've moved away from basic needs. Now we're afraid of, like, what somebody's going to say to us on social media, a total stranger we'll never meet. So something's happened there. Maybe it's just finding a different way of expressing it.
And I think too, the criticism, like, we could be criticized for being late for work or something like that. But let's imagine that you're moving up the Maslow's hierarchy and you really want to contribute to the world, and you're writing a book or you're setting up this amazing project or doing something, and something happens that causes that to get stuck. Someone gets in the way of it or won't approve it, or they're criticizing that. I can imagine that the reaction to that kind of thing might be much more strong, simply because of the importance that you're placing on it in your own identity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you criticize me for being late. I'm not going to care about that as much as you say, I hate your podcast episode or something like that I have put a lot of effort into.
So what happens if we detach ourselves from putting importance on anything, whether it's about showing up late or our podcast. Who cares? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I think actually that's an incredibly helpful technique for
Okay.
self-regulation. And yeah, it's almost like we remove the attachment from the results. And in that way, we can almost, I think Michael Singer talks about like thinking about yourself as a human, like you've just appeared on the earth and your job is just to observe what's going on. And I really like Robert Greene's way of talking about learning as well, that we just experiment. And in that way, there's no success or failure. It's just observing the results of the experiment. And so I think that's probably what you're referring to there. If we detach the judgment, the valence that we put on it, this is good or bad that this happened, and instead approach it as, well, that happened. And of course, that would mean then that we have a much less emotional reaction, I think, to tragedies and problems and setbacks and drawbacks along the way too. There's a Buddhist story I really like about a Buddhist farmer, and his horse ran away one day, and all of the villagers came up and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that your horse ran away." I apologize, Chris, you've probably heard this before, but some of your listeners may not have. They came and said, "I'm so sorry to hear your horse ran away." And then the next day, the horse came back and it had found a mate. So he had two horses. And the villagers came and said, "I'm so happy for you. You got the two horses. That's amazing." And then his son was riding the new horse and he fell off and broke his leg. And the villagers said, "I'm so sorry to hear about your son. That's a terrible accident." And every time the villagers would come and say to him, he would just sort of respond by saying, "We'll see, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see." Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know. And so they said, "I'm so sorry to hear about your son." But then the next day, there was a war in that country and a military conscription happened. And his son didn't have to go and fight in the war because he was injured. So do you know what I mean? What we see as the drawbacks and the setbacks, of course, in the long run, aren't necessarily that. They're opportunities for learning and growth and all of the rest of it. And removing ourselves from that attachment to the consequence, I think that can be an incredibly effective strategy when we can manage it.
Yeah. That story reminds me of this idea, and I hope I say it right, that failure isn't really failure. It's just looking at the timeline and the wrong scale of things.
Mm,
So each one of these moments, it's a failure, good news or bad news happens. But if we zoom all the way out, we just wait long enough, we see like, oh, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And maybe at the end of our life, we come to that conclusion that all the trials and tribulations, all the heartache and all the triumphs and trials that we've been through were exactly what was necessary for you to live this life that you lived.
mm.
Take one thing away, the whole thing changes again.
And do you feel like that makes a difference for you then, like in the moment during conversations, for example, Chris? Like, how would that affect the way that you respond to, someone complaining to you about something or a problem that you're coming across in your work?
The way I see it is I have a very strong emotional regulator that I go even. So I'm not, say if it's from 0 to 100, I'm at 0 because I'd be dead. I'm not at 100 because I'd explode with too much heat and violence, I think. I'm
Mm,
probably idling around 85. So I run at a cool 85 and I think I'm okay. I don't need to rev up or down. And
yeah.
so when something comes into my life to interrupt all that, I'm like, oh, okay, something's happening here. I don't want to get pulled into the emotional magnet or drawn into that hole. So I'm
Mm,
just like, okay, it happened. That broke.
mm.
That didn't break. I got a gig. I didn't get a gig. It all just happens. Right.
It's been one of the things that I've appreciated most about your channel, to be frank, is that I've felt a lot of anxiety putting myself out there and publishing content. And a lot of anxiety is an incredible understatement. I'm talking about like 7 years of procrastinating and trying and never pressing publish.
Uh,
And so finally understanding that this is a learning process and you will learn by doing. Do you know what I mean? And I think you've been actually a role model, to be frank, of just the ability to try and just experiment and give it a go. For me, I wasn't able to just do that. I needed to do the self-regulation. Literally before I press the publish button, I have to take a
right.
few deep breaths.
Mm.
But it was enough to get me across the line. Isn't that interesting that we come essentially from polar opposites in our natural
Yeah.
defaults, but some of the
Well,
techniques that we're using seem to be similar. There's a bit of overlap there.
yeah, I just find that people, especially even my team or people close to me, they get worked up over things that don't even impact them. For
Yeah.
example, I make a post. There's a typo in it. Okay. I'm not trying to tell you I'm a proofreader. That would look embarrassing if I was a proofreader, but I'm not claiming to be one. And they're like, "Oh, you just did a webinar and one person didn't like it." I'm like, "But how many people liked it?" Why are we always focused on that one negative piece of information and we catastrophize it, we magnify it, and we
Right.
just live in that place? And it's how does I don't even understand. I can't even tell you, Simon, that I understand that mindset. I just know that it doesn't feel healthy. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel conducive to doing good work and to enjoying your life. We've got a short moment here. I have
Yeah.
to ask you this other question though. If I'm in this state of detachment and extremely high emotional regulation, what's a downside to that? Because there's got to be some.
What makes you think there must be a downside?
Because there's always a downside to everything.
Well, I suppose it would be when your wife's upset and you're like, oh, what's the big deal? Just let it go.
Well, how did you know? How did you know that was going to be the one? So you're like, there's no downside except for
your
this
son,
one.
yeah, and your kids are like, what's your problem, Dad? And you're like, I don't know, what's
Yeah,
the big deal?
right. Because you're
Yeah.
just too chill,
So I
right? I
suppose
remember
it
one
could,
time
yeah. So it
my
might
wife was really
introduce,
upset.
well, it might mean that people could feel like you're not taking their issues seriously, for
Yeah.
example. They might feel like you're not, like if it's a client and you seem really chill and casual, like it'll be fine, no problem. But they are in a panic. They might necessarily find that helpful for calming themselves down. So they might still be worked up and blowing their top, and you're on the Groundhog Day kind of loop of the conversation, etc.
Yeah.
So I suppose those are some of the potential drawbacks, is that the other person might not think that you care and that it might not be the most effective way of calming them down. And actually, one
Okay.
of the things that we'll talk about in assertiveness is like the sort of two aspects of summary, like summarizing their perspective as well as ours. So even though
Yeah.
you don't necessarily think it's a big deal that there was a typo, let's imagine that you wanted to talk to your team about that. You might convey the impression that you understand where they're coming from, even though you don't agree. So it's like, I get it from your perspective, this is a big deal. And it's not just on this channel, it's actually gone out to LinkedIn and all of these other places too. I can see where you're coming from. At the
Yeah.
same time, let's just pause and think about it. It is just a typo. And to be frank, it's not like I'm a proofreading channel. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so I'm not necessarily sure this is such a big deal, but what do you think? So it's almost like I need to start where they are from that panic state and then say, okay, I understand that. At the same time, this is where I'm coming from, or this is how I see things. What do you think would help? What should we do? What's the next step we should take? That kind of thing. You don't want to make the mistake of assuming that everybody thinks the way that you do.
No, I know people very
Yeah.
rarely think the way I do. So let's get into this part though.
Mm.
Let's keep it on the realm of a client. I can understand that. So I'm not airing out all my dirty laundry. We can go
Okay.
there too. I don't mind either. So a client's like freaking out because something happened. A deadline's fast approaching and it doesn't feel like you're at the part where you're supposed to be at in that timeline. Let's just say that's what it is. It's a very real thing. So they call you and it's like, hey, Chris, or they're like, hey, Simon, I know we're just 2 days out and we're supposed to have seen all these things. And I'm just really concerned that we're not going to be able to deliver. And this is a hard deadline. We have a hard air date. And then you're pretty chill about it. And then what is happening now? And how do
Mm.
we work on this? Because I have a very strong philosophy on this and I want to get to, but what's happening there?
In the other person, do you mean?
Yeah, let's just look at the dynamic. One
Mm.
person's really concerned, the client.
Mm.
It doesn't look like we're gonna get done, and you're just pretty laissez-faire, kind of chill. What happens? What's going on?
Yeah, there's a dissonance, isn't there? Because they
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing a very high level of perceived threat. For them, it's a catastrophe, it's urgent, it's an emergency. There is a lot at stake here. And if your response is like, what's the big deal? It'll be okay. Even just, it'll be right, it'll be okay, don't worry. Calm down, I think, is one thing that usually
Yeah.
doesn't work very well when we tell people to calm down. It's usually all it takes to set them off. And they feel like it's dismissed and minimized and that you're not taking it seriously. And ultimately, it doesn't give them confidence in the fact that their problem is going to be resolved. So if our goal is to de-escalate them, which it isn't always, like if this is a difficult client and they've paid in full and we're already done, it might be just, look, thanks for the feedback. I'd be happy to organize a time to do it, but right now this isn't the time. And, you don't do the de-escalation stuff. You just let them be upset. But if it's an ongoing project, an important client, you probably do want to focus on de-escalation. So I think there we need to, the preemptive empathy that I sort of talked about that you use really well, Chris. Here we want to use actual empathy. It's summarizing what they've said. Let me just check. I understand what you've told me. So it sounds like from your perspective, this has happened and then this, and you tried to let us know this, but despite that, this still wasn't fixed. And now it's created this problem. And as you've said, we're 2 weeks away from launch, and it sounds like you're not sure whether or not it's actually going to be right at the end of the day. And I know for you, there's a lot at stake. Like, it's not just the money that you've invested into the project. There's so much of your blood, sweat, and tears that's gone into this. And ultimately, you're wanting to give your customers the best experience that they can possibly have. So I can understand where you're coming from. So we
Mhm.
really want to lean in and empathize much more thoroughly than we would need to be empathized, or you would need to be empathized with, Chris, from the
Right.
sounds of it. But it's for their sake. And when someone has that sense of really being understood and heard, it helps them to calm down.
I want to try and pretend like I'm in this situation and say what I'm going to say, and then you respond to it either as from the psychological point of view, or just as a human responding to it, like as if I'm saying this to you. So probably here's what would happen if you came to me like, we're 2 days out from the deadline. I'm really concerned, blah, blah, blah. Let's see how I would say it. I would probably ask you, I would label it. I'm like, it sounds like you're concerned, given that there's 2 days left and you're not seeing the progress that you think you need to see. Is there anything else that we're missing? Is there something else that you're feeling that we can talk about? And they would say
Mm,
whatever, right?
mm,
Then I would say to them, it may not look like it from your perspective, but this is exactly where we're supposed to be. I've got 44 people in the other room working on this
mm,
nonstop day and night. And the 200 other projects we've done just like this, it literally comes down to these last few moments. And
mm,
all of
mm.
a sudden it's going to be super clear, but there was a lot of groundwork that needed to be done. So it's kind of like par for the course.
Yes.
I'm going to say it in the calmest voices I can say it, because I always feel like they need to know you're in charge. Somebody's got to be in charge here, and just to see like someone calm, like we're good. Like the scene from Pulp Fiction comes to mind. The Wolf, Harvey Keitel, John Travolta, Sam Jackson literally blew somebody's brains out in the back of the car. There's blood everywhere. I think Bonnie's coming home in a couple hours. They're in the valley, and the wolf comes in. It's like, here's what we're gonna do. And then, Sam Jackson's character is extremely lovable. He's like, damn, they're going to send the wolf. The wolf is here. And they already know once you send the wolf's going to make your problems go away. So the wolf is in his normal wolf self, and he says, do this, don't do that. And Travolta ain't having any of it. He goes, how about a pleaser? Thank you. He goes, well, it's not me who shot the guy's brains out. We're on a tight timetable. I don't mean to be curt, but we need to do what we're going to say. So please, thank you, F you. Let's go.
Mm,
So he ain't even for this. I'm here to take care of a job. And,
mm,
Sam Jackson's still like, wow, why are you talking to the wolf like that, man?
mm.
Don't you know he's here? He's a big deal. So I'm not saying I'm the wolf, but it's like, we've been here. There's no reason to panic. We can understand why you're panicked.
Mm.
And my thing is, that's how I would de-escalate. So please give me your professional take on this.
I think that was an incredible example, to be frank, Chris, and there was a few elements that you included there. You referred to tone of voice specifically, and I absolutely agree. This is something very important that we should focus on. So we should aim for a lower volume, or when we're being assertive, probably average volume, but we don't want to yell. We don't want to have a raised voice. Loud enough to be heard, but not raised. Lower steady tone and slower speed. Those are the three aspects that we want to include in terms of how we talk. So whatever we decide to say, that's how we should speak. And then there was two things that you did, which I really liked. One was giving certainty. Like, you might not know this, but I've got 40 people back here, and this is normally the way that it goes. And, it's on track according to the last few projects that we've done, whatever, giving them information. And as much as possible about, this is the next step, this is when we're going to come to you with the next update, this is what's the next stage, this kind of thing. When people know what to expect, they find it much more easy to manage emotionally. So certainty is one aspect that's very helpful. Relatedness, the empathy aspect, I understand where you're coming from, I can hear your concerns. And then the other thing that you did was that you provided them with autonomy. You gave them a sense of being in control. You said, are there any other thoughts that you've got, or any other feelings that you have, or any other ideas of what might work, this kind of thing. And that's incredibly helpful. Even if there's a default way you would normally respond to the problem, like, no worries, thanks for letting me know, this is what we'd normally do. Let the client feel like they're in the driver's seat. When there's a problem, it feels very scary. And if someone's just telling us, this is what we're going to do, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, it begins to feel a bit like we're on the roller coaster and we're going up over the scariest bit of the track, and now we're about to hit the scary bit. Whereas when we have autonomy, that sense of control, we're in the driver's seat, like we've got the steering wheel. So maybe you'd say to the client something like, look, thanks for letting me know about that problem. This is what we would normally do to fix it. Is that what you had in mind, or do you think something else might work better? Like I'm essentially getting them to say, yes, that's what I'd like you to do. So I really like that aspect that you included there too, of what are your thoughts? Are there any other feelings that you've got? Even if they don't have any, you've given them that sense of being in control, even during the conversation itself. So there are a few aspects there that I think would be particularly effective.
Yeah. One more movie reference for you, Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman. And they're always like, oh, that's a problem. And Dustin Hoffman, being a seasoned Hollywood producer, it's like, that's not a problem. When we shot Apocalypse Now and this and that happened, that was a problem. This is not a problem. And true to his word, Hoffman took care of everything. People tend to catastrophize, blow things out of proportion. And he's like, no, that was a challenge, but we got through that one. But that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always about the other person's perception, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
even assertiveness, ultimately, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's in the eye of the perceiver. Like, I can think that I'm being very assertive, but someone else might describe me as being aggressive and full on and over the top. Or my boss might be sitting there listening to me have a conversation and think, gosh, Simon, you need to find a way to stand up for yourself. Like that client's walking all over the top of you, kind of thing. So, yeah, ultimately, I think each person interprets these situations and communications and messages differently. All we can do is do our best to prepare and structure and frame and position ourselves, and get the message across as best that we can, and then adjust and adapt and take a flexible approach if we're not getting the reaction that we were hoping for.
So I see a guy on the Slack line. What's going on here?
Well, we're talking about self-regulation. So this would be about when you have probably had the negative feedback and you've decided to still press publish anyway, but you've got that doubt sitting in the back of your head. How can you push past the insecurities that are sitting there? Or when you're in the middle of a difficult conversation with the client, like you have that ability to keep calm so that you can articulate yourself in that clear way that you did before. But a lot of people won't. A lot of people feel flustered and they feel worked up and their heart's racing and their palms are sweaty and their face gets a little bit flushed. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about just some practical tools that people can use to keep themselves calm, especially during difficult conversations and, what I'd think about as conflict. So breathing deeply tends to be probably the go-to strategy, I think, for most people. It's so useful because we can do it during a difficult conversation and during conflict. It doesn't take any additional equipment and it doesn't really need any particular training either. The general principle is that we want to breathe deeply and focus on the breath out. The exhale is more important than the breath in when it comes to slowing our heart rate and calming ourselves down. It's more effective if you use your nose rather than your mouth. And I often talk about this, it's called piston breathing that Andrew Huberman talks about a few times on his YouTube channel. The way that we do it is that we breathe in through our nose and then we pause and then we breathe in a little bit more and then we breathe all of the way out. So breathe in and pause, keep breathing in, breathe all of the way out. The first time that you do this, the first breath that you take, you might like to just really extend that breath out. Just let it go, let it go, let it go. We've often got a lot more oxygen in our lungs than we expect. And when we've breathed all of the way out, a lot of us experience a little bit of a tingling sensation almost. It creates a lot of physical space in our lungs. If you imagine your lungs are blowing up like balloons and then deflating kind of thing. So there's this real sense of being present when we've breathed out all of the way. The time frame, if you wanted to get very technical, is 5.5 seconds. So I normally count to 6 breathing in and count to 6 breathing out as a general guideline to myself, just in my head. So breathing deeply, like let's imagine your wife came home from the pool or you're talking to the client and they're upset about this problem with the project that's coming to deadline. Breathing deeply would be one of the techniques that you can use to keep yourself calm during the conversation. And if you've got junior staff who struggle with self-regulation, this might be one of the tools that you would suggest that they try. Just experiment with it. The next tool that we could use is mindfulness. This is, I'm not necessarily talking about sitting cross-legged in a Zen pose on the floor meditating. It's simply paying attention to your physical senses. So I mean, I do meditate. I really like meditation, but some people have a bit of an adverse reaction to the word meditation almost. I don't know if that's an Australian kind of cultural thing, but I'm really just talking about paying attention to your physical senses. Like, what's the temperature of the air in the room where you're sitting? Is there any breeze or is it still? What about the sounds? Is there any background noise? Can you hear the cars going past or something like that? Are there any smells in the room that you're sitting in? Is there any taste in your mouth? Can you taste the leftover coffee or the lunch that you had or something like that? And what can you feel? Which bits of your back are touching your chair? Wiggle your toes and feel the feeling of your socks in your boots. What's your tongue doing in your mouth? At any one moment, we've got all of this sensory information coming into our brain, and our brain needs to decide what to focus on. And the more escalated that we get when we're in a difficult conversation with clients, for example, we develop this intense tunnel vision on the thing that we perceive as a threat. So by engaging in this mindfulness technique of just paying attention, like wiggling your toes and feel the feeling of your socks in your boots, it shifts our focus, connects us to the present, and stops our mind from spinning about the past and, worrying about the future of what we're going to say next and worrying about what might happen next. So those two techniques, I think, for so many people are just incredibly helpful starting points if your goal is to be a little bit more of a Christo type of character in these difficult conversations that you're needing to manage. Choosing your response, just pausing, check your thinking. Do I really need to organize the pool to be replaced right now? And think about your behavior and maybe just expand your options, like get a pen and paper out and just write down a list of options that you could take. So we talked about the deep breathing techniques and then mindfulness. The third option would be choosing your response, becoming aware of that natural reaction, the inclinations that you have, and just pausing and thinking about what would be the ideal way of responding here. Like, even though this client's being unreasonable, is this the kind of situation where I should demonstrate some empathy, even though I don't necessarily think it's as serious as they do? Or is this the kind of situation where I should be assertive and hold the line and just be firm and say, we've talked about this before, that wasn't in the original scope. If you'd like us to make those changes, we'd be happy to discuss it, but there would be an additional cost. Creating space, just pausing before you respond, taking a break, delaying replying, like write the email that you want to send, but don't necessarily press send. Summarize the situation in your head, like, we've talked about this and they've talked about this. They were upset about this. At the moment, I've gone back to them with this. I'm not sure what they're going to say. Just capturing the narrative so that in our head, we can understand the context of this current email that we're looking at or the current message that we've just got. Adjusting your posture and your movement can be incredibly helpful. And I'm doing that myself. When I'm feeling nervous, we want to adopt a confident posture. So chin up, chest open, shoulders down and back, acting confident. To be frank, it's a lot like you seem, Chris. Like, I do want to give the impression of someone that's calm and composed. So I channel my inner Christo. I channel my inner king. I think about watching a dramatic play and how the rulers act, and they're very noble. They are still and composed and calm, and they're sure of themselves. And all of the actions going on around them, there's all the clowns and all of the other people that are nervous, but they are secure. So adopting a physical posture which seems secure will then help you to begin to feel more calm and confident as a result. And as we go through these difficult conversations, difficult experiences in our career, the technical problems that come up during a really important and incredible podcast opportunity, we can look at these as learning opportunities. You mentioned something along these lines earlier in our conversation, Chris. Once we recognize that this is about practice, this is about my development, that however uncomfortable and however difficult this conversation is, that is literally corresponding with the level of learning and the increase in my performance that I can expect after this, if I can find a way to hold it together and get through it. So in a sense, it doesn't mean that it doesn't suck. Like, it feels really uncomfortable and it feels terrible in the moment, but I need to remind myself that this is part of what I need. And it's actually going to open the door for some of the things that I want longer term, like, the bigger goals for my business, or why I want to earn money to provide for my family, or all of those kind of things. So it somehow might help me to develop the tolerance for dealing with this annoying client when I can connect it with a bigger goal, something that is actually important to me that I'm working towards. It's really about practice, and all of us are probably going to have a different mix of techniques that work for us. So, my advice, usually, especially for people early on in their career, is just to experiment and find something that works for you. So, those are some techniques that work during a difficult conversation or, during an interaction with a client. We also need to find options for resetting after conflict. I mentioned the buildup of cortisol, that stress hormone that our brain creates when we go into this fight or flight mode. And we don't necessarily want to carry that into the next thing that we go into, the next email that I need to write, the next conversation that I need to have. And I actually find this is particularly important when I'm trying to do something creative, like writing something new, or I'm a musician. So when I'm trying to write a song or something like that, if I've just had an argument with someone, I've got no chance. So I need to think about short-term ways of resetting my nervous system. So some options that could work include taking a break, having something to eat, going for a walk, doing some deep breathing, moving around, like going to a different section of the office, going for a walk around the building, shaking your limbs, just letting out a little bit of that buildup of energy that's there, swearing, crying, yelling. Some people wet a towel and they throw it at the ground as hard as they can and swear really loudly. Oh, for F's sake, what an effing idiot. Or find someone that you can talk to, a colleague, and just have a quick debrief. Oh my goodness, you should have seen what this client just did. That was so full on. It just helps us to clear the air, so to speak. And then that afternoon or that night, especially if you've had a difficult experience, your energy will be affected. So don't trust your perceptions. You're going to be much more pessimistic. You'll overreact when your wife makes a negative comment or something like that. You're not thinking very clearly. So give yourself some space and choose activities that help you to refresh and restore that balance. And then longer term, we need to think about recoveries, time off, that kind of thing, and think about what we need. You don't want to get back to work on Monday and feel like you haven't even had a weekend because you've been, in online debates with people on forums or something like that, smashing Reddit out or something. Maybe just quiet or hanging out with the people that fill up your emotional bucket and give you joy, or spending time playing guitar or making a painting or looking after yourself even. Often the things that we do over the weekend affect the capacity that we have for dealing with conflict and dealing with stress when it comes to Monday morning. So I think those are, generally speaking, some different techniques that tend to be quite helpful for resetting. And again, I think the default for a lot of people is that I'm just being silly. I'm making too much of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, why can't I just go with the flow? And unfortunately, you often need to do something differently if you want to feel different. What's that old saying? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've already got. And if you're a flustered mess that falls apart at the slightest hint of conflict, then it's probably about doing something different in self-regulation. Because I mentioned with that client, even the one that you were talking about, where the deadline's approaching and they've got some problems, or from their perspective, some problems that they perceive. And you've got those two paths that you can go down. One is the empathy, de-escalation, let's collaborate here. The other is assertiveness. It's holding the line and being more firm. Like we've talked about this before, or I'm happy to talk through these concerns, but we'd need to organize a time to do it. I'm available at this time and this time, which time works for you, kind of thing. And assertiveness is a very challenging area for a lot of people. And it is truly one of the ones that's in the eye of the perceiver. Like I can do my best to prepare and think that I'm being assertive, but ultimately it depends on how the other person takes it. Most people think about assertiveness as being somewhere in between being too passive and too aggressive. So that's probably what we're aiming for. Being calm and confident. It's about how you act, how you communicate, as well as what you communicate and what you say. And the focus for me when I'm trying to be assertive, and it's more likely that it comes across as being assertive. It's when the focus is on the behavior, what the other person's done, and the consequences. Like, why is that a problem? And what I want to do is to request changes in behavior in a very clear and direct way. So I want to maintain reasonable eye contact. I don't want to be looking at my notes or looking down at my phone or something like that. Not too much, roughly 70%, so to speak, but I do want to engage them and show them that I'm focused. I want to use a posture that seems confident, upright, like my spine straight, but I also want to seem somewhat relaxed. I don't want to seem really tense and too over the top, like that's when it comes across as being too aggressive. I want to limit movement, like not too many gestures, not too much. If I'm the kind of person that talks with my hands, I might just hold them and clasp them on my lap or something like that while I'm speaking. I want to appear undistracted, not looking from thing to thing, just focused on one issue. That's steady, low tone, lower volume, slow speed, tone of voice. Tolerating silence, especially once you've delivered bad news, you need to give the other person a chance to process it. And you should probably prepare for some kind of a reaction that they're going to give you, especially if you're going to tell them something that's going to upset them. Choose appropriate distance from them. It's usually 2 arms lengths, roughly speaking. Sitting, if possible, tends to be more helpful. And maintaining balance, allowing them to have a say as well. Don't do all of the talking, that kind of thing. These softening statements can work really well for minimizing that defensiveness and resistance that can come up when we're being assertive. So when we're delivering an assertive kind of message. The first one is what are called softening statements. Like, you might not realize this. Actually, you wouldn't be aware of this, but I've got 40 staff back behind me and they're working hard on your project. So I'm trying to say, I know that you're not an idiot and I know you're not a jerk. This is new information that you wouldn't have, but I do want to let you know because it's important. I know it's easy to lose track of all of these emails. I'm just following up on this one that I sent through a couple of days ago because it doesn't look like I've received a reply. Like, I'm normalizing the fact that you didn't reply to me. It's probably because you're busy. We could label the emotions. I appreciate that this is probably incredibly frustrating given all of the effort that you've made to avoid the issue. We could acknowledge the negative impact. I know for you, you were hoping that, I don't know, this project could be delivered by the end of June, and now it looks like that might not be possible. And slow down, allowing that time and space for processing. Now, when it comes to deliver bad news, we want to do it in a way that appears calm and confident. But what this means is that we need to prepare for both the issue, like how I'm going to communicate the message itself, as well as how I'm going to manage the conversation. Like, when am I going to give them a chance to speak? How am I going to introduce the reason that we're meeting today? When I'm delivering the bad news, I want to do it in a way that's direct and concise. I wanted to talk to you about the project. There's been challenges obtaining some of the materials. This means that there's going to be a delay of at least 2 weeks. I've contacted the supplier and they'll be able to come back to me with an exact date sometime in the next day or 2. And as soon as I've got that information, I'll let you know. So very short and sweet. And then after that, we want to allow time for processing. Allow the person to take in the news that we've just given them and think it through. They might have some kind of a reaction. That's often about that fight or flight reaction that's coming up in them. And where possible, we should allow them that sense of control. Do you have any questions? Is there any additional information that would be helpful? Would you like to consider going with a different option that would mean that we can get something done quicker, even though it wouldn't necessarily be the same design that you originally talked about? And then once you've gone through all of that, we want to, as much as possible, clarify those next steps. This is where we're building in the certainty and letting them know what to expect from here.
Let's say you needed to fire me. Can you go through the firing process as it relates to the 5 steps?
Like, how would I manage that conversation kind of thing, Chris?
Yeah.
So it's probably after a series of performance management meetings that we've had. So there might already be some norms developed in terms of how these meetings go.
Let's say there was none. Let's say they did something so wrong that they need to kind of be fired without warning.
Yeah. So in terms of
they broke some core values, something not good.
Yeah. I mean, even if there was a precedent that's already established, you would still need to consider whether or not you follow it or not, right? So you would want to set up the room in a way that's private, obviously, if possible, or organized to meet in a relatively private space if you don't have much control over that. I would want to prepare myself. So take a few deep breaths, maybe take a few laps around the building, rehearse what I'm going to say, have all of my notes in front of me ready, so that when I go in, I'm going to do my best to be calm and composed. And it's a little bit like I'm actually a duck on the water. You know, underneath the surface, I'm not calm and composed. I'm nervous and anxious, but I'm wanting to give the impression that I'm calm and composed. So then I'd probably try to introduce the message as early as possible, to be frank. Like, I've had to fire a few different people. It's not something that anybody finds very pleasant, but I don't like to extend the torture, if you know what I mean. I prefer just to rip off the Band-Aid. So I think if it was me, I'd probably say something like, look, Chris, I wanted to talk to you about your, or, well, it would depend on whether or not we've had any conversations about it before. I can't imagine
Nope,
I'd be firing
they're
you.
not.
Oh,
Yeah.
you've
And
just
this has
breached
happened over
to,
a phone call
okay.
we're across the country or something.
Well, I suppose it would be saying something like, look, Chris, I wanted to talk to you about the incident that happened last week at the Christmas party. I've met with the other executive managers and we've made the decision to let you go. Why? What's the big problem? You're making too much of it, something like that. Or if you didn't say anything, I'll just pause and let that sit for a moment. And I'd say something like, this is the preemptive empathy aspect. To you, this might seem very much like I'm overreacting. After all, this was a Christmas party. It was outside of the normal office hours. We weren't even doing our regular work roles. At the same time, we've got reasonably strict policies around the kinds of behaviours that are accepted in terms of respectful communication. And given the number of complaints that we received from the other staff, or given the fact that we had to call the police, or whatever the thing was that we had to do, unfortunately, there's no flexibility in this situation. So for me, I like using particular phrases like there's no flexibility or this is not negotiable, something like that. I might include that in the messaging some way. So I've met with the executive managers. We've made the decision to let you go. In some settings, I might say, we've made the decision to end your employment with the company. And then I'd explain the next steps that would take. So this is what will happen. We'll organize someone from HR to give you a call and do this and this. You can come in and collect your belongings, this kind of thing. So I'd probably say, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. This is the decision. Allow some, time for processing. In a real situation, they're probably going to have something to say after that, either asking a question or complaining and trying to get you to change their mind. And I might let them talk for a while. Like I might give them a sense of control. Oh, okay. Like when you say that it's not a big deal, what are you basing that on? So I'm getting them to explain their perspective. Oh, when you say that you weren't the only one doing it, there were other people involved. What do you mean by that? Could you give me a bit more information about that? Because that wasn't something that I was aware of. Like I might go down that path of allowing them to give me this extra information. But if we've talked about all of this before, and this is a high conflict, narcissistic, overly dramatic kind of person, I might instead choose an assertive approach of just saying, I appreciate that. There's probably a number of factors and I'm not aware of all of the information. Nevertheless, this is the decision that's been made. So does that
Well
sort
done.
of make sense how it relates to the different aspects there, Chris?
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was kind of mapping it to what I said, what I didn't say, and how it all went, and imagining also myself hearing this piece of information and seeing how you handled it. It was really clear. You said, we're having this conversation because of what the incident that happened at XYZ, without
Yeah.
getting into the exact incident.
Right.
I've met with other people, so this is not a knee-jerk response to something. It's thoughtful, it's deliberate, and then you also say unfortunately there's no flexibility in this. That ship has sailed essentially, so there's no room for negotiation, bartering, all the kind of hemming and hawing. We don't have to get into it. And so here's what's going to happen next. Don't show up to work today.
The decision
we'll
is
arrange
final.
a time for you to
Yeah.
get your stuff. I like it.
Yeah. And if I was a caring, supportive manager and I did like the person, even though they'd done something that was quite wrong, I might check in with them, the next morning or something like that, or ask them, would you mind if I give you a call in a couple of days and just see how you're traveling? Or would there be any other kind of support that we could offer you, something like that? To be honest, I think I do, when I fired people, I just feel very guilty. And so I sometimes need to also manage that. I don't want to go too much into what kind of support can we give you when that's not necessarily appropriate in every situation.
Very good. I've never asked someone if I can call them later. I said, basically when this dust settles, I'm not upset at you. If you want to go meet up somewhere, I'd be happy to. And very rarely do they ever.
The best case scenario, I suppose, would have been that you would have been able to intervene with that staff member before they got fired, like talk to them at the Christmas party before they did the action that they were about to take or something like that. This is what's called a positive confrontation. Like, how can we ask someone to stop doing something that they're doing? You might have a client that calls you after hours, or they expect quick turnaround on something that you're doing, or it could be any number of things. They're not paying their invoices on time. I really like this particular framework. It was developed by a psychologist called Barbara Pachter. It's the what, ask, check model. The idea is that we talk about what has the person done and why it's a problem. Then we ask, this is what I want you to do differently. And then the final step is a check. Are there any issues with that? Are there any questions? Is there any problem? So with the unpaid invoice thing, we could say, look, I'm calling about this invoice. It hasn't been paid. Would you be able to organize payment by the end of the week? Are there any issues with this on your end? Just very short and sweet. And the reason that I ended up emailing you originally or messaging you on LinkedIn, Chris, was because of a conversation that I heard. And you were talking about a situation in a restaurant and there was a problem with your meal. And you called the waiter over and you said something like, look, I'm so sorry, I didn't order this sauce or something like that. Would you be able to take it back to the kitchen and see if there's something that they can do? Is that possible? You actually followed a very similar kind of steps here. What? This isn't what I ordered. There's a problem with my meal. Now, some people just do that. That's where they stop. Excuse me, waiter, this isn't what I ordered. And of course, that invites defensiveness. Oh, I checked my notes and that is what you asked for, right? Whereas if you say, I'm so sorry, this isn't what I ordered. Could you please take it back to the kitchen and see if they can swap it? Immediately they have a task that they can do. We're not giving them that sense of perceived criticism. Instead, it comes across as a request. And then the final step is, would that be okay? Any issues with this? Something like this. So you can see an example on the screen for those of you with the visuals, but I'll read it for those on audio. When you come to the office without an appointment, it puts me in a difficult spot because I want to make sure I give you the correct information and I don't necessarily have the time I need to prepare. When you need to meet, could you shoot me a quick email or give me a call? Would that be okay? Are there any issues with this on your end? So it doesn't have to be a big, massive drama, but I think for people who are conflict avoidant, this is a very helpful framework that they can use to be a little bit more assertive in those kind of situations where it's worth it.
It's deceptively simple and straightforward. It seems very intuitive.
Mm.
So as I hear this, I'm like, what do people say instead of this?
Well, they usually just do the what or they just do the
Right.
ask. Yeah. This is the third time you've been late. And that's all they leave it with.
Right.
That's just a complaint. Or
That's
they
like an
say,
accusation.
yeah. Or can you try to be on time in the future? And the person's not aware of what they've done, like why it's caused the problem. Whereas if you say, look, this is the third time you've been late, it puts us in a tough spot because we're not sure whether or not to wait for you or get started. Can you make sure that you're on time moving forward or flick me a message when you're running late? Any issues with that? It just
What about the
tends
criticism that it seems a little passive? Could you check in with us when you're late?
the check part kind of thing. If you're wanting to be less passive, I suppose you would do the check in, do you have any questions? Is that clear? Is there any more information that's needed? Yeah. You're not wearing the right safety equipment. You're in breach of our safety regulations. You need to go and do it now. Are there any problems with that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we do want to know if there's a problem. Like maybe there's not the right safety equipment that the person needs, or maybe a different manager in your business has told the staff member to do something else. Like the idea is that we want to put that on the table and talk about it. I don't want to tell someone to do something and they say yes, but in their head, they've got an excuse like, well, Chris doesn't mind if I don't do it, or the other boss
Right.
told me that I have to do something else. I'd prefer to talk it through and I say, any problems with that? And then they might say, well, the other boss doesn't care. The other boss doesn't tell me to do it. And then I can follow that up however I decide. Look, that's fine. I'll follow that up with the other boss. For now, can you just do what I've asked and I'll let you know if anything changes.
Let's use the same framework. Let's say now that they're late and it needs to be more assertive because this is the warning to, if you're late again, I got to fire you. So how would you do that using the exact same framework of what ask and check?
You're talking about sort of gradually escalating the level of assertiveness. There might be, it could be anything, someone using their phone consistently during meetings or someone delaying replying to emails and you want them to be more responsive and they're anxious and conflict avoidant or something. So there's a few different options that we've got. For people who tend to be natural accommodators and conflict avoiders, this if you then I approach tends to be quite helpful. If you can do this, then I can do this for you. If you can make sure that you're on late, then I'd be happy to let you run one of the meetings each month or something like that. If you can be more consistent with your punctuality, then I'm happy to look at that option that you've put through for the training program that you'd like to participate in. So again, I'm connecting it to something that's important to them. And it's not necessarily you need to change. It's like there's give and take here. This is a collaborative kind of framing of it. Now, we wouldn't always do that. I think this one does seem a little bit soft sometimes
Yes, it
because you
does.
are giving something that's important to you.
Uh-huh.
So let's go to the next level of what might be the higher up. Here, we want to summarize their perspective as well as ours. So I might increase the sense of that there's more at stake here by organizing a formal meeting with them or scheduling a phone call or something like that. And I might say explicitly, look, I want to talk to you about punctuality. We've discussed it before, and you've told me that you're going to be on time more consistently, but there's been a number of times over the past couple of weeks where you didn't arrive to the office until at least 10 o'clock. Now, I know for you, you've got young children and there's a lot going on the family front. There's more travel involved from your end, given the fact that you live out of town, and traffic's probably quite difficult to predict. So what I've done there is really summarize their perspective. Like, I understand that there's factors involved that might be contributing here. And then I say something like, at the same time, or and, it puts the team in a difficult spot when you're late because we're relying on crucial information that you're able to provide in order to progress the conversations. So I'd say, I understand why there's some reasons why you're late. Again, this is why it's causing some problems. And then I might ask a question like, what do you need to do to make sure that you're on time more consistently? So I tend to favor that coaching kind of question as a result of at the end of that kind of framing, like, this is the situation. I understand that you've got all these problems. At the same time, the business can't function if this doesn't change. What can you do, or what options do you think might help for this to improve moving forward?
Wonderful. I'd like to share with you what I've said and get you to correct it or critique it or whatever. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's something I've had to do, unfortunately. So I'll say something like this. It's been brought to my attention that in the last couple of weeks, you've consistently showed up late. And I'm not talking about 2 or 3 minutes late. I'm talking 10 to 15 minutes late. And it puts everyone else in a position where they start to wonder, is it okay to come and go whenever we want? And that's not the case. So my question to you is this. Do you think you can show up on time as the way everyone else does it? And then they'll say yes. So we're in agreement then, because if you cannot make it to work on time, you need to let me know in advance. But if you consistently do this, meaning don't show up on time, I will have no other choice but then to let you go. Are we clear? All right. Please critique and review.
It's great. I'll just do it in the reverse order.
Tell me.
This is so interesting, Chris. Like, you're literally talking about the next slide that I was going to discuss, which is the ultimatum. Like, this is the point where this can't continue anymore. We're not going to continue to have these conversations.
Yeah.
This is your last chance kind of thing. Like, if you don't pay this invoice, the project is going to be put on hold. Now, most people do it in the way that you did. Like, you used much more skillful language and your phrasing, etc., was very good. Your tone of voice was just spot on. Or what would you say? What's the American version of spot on? On point. Your tone of voice was on point.
Spot on point. Both sound good to me.
But I think it's better to do it in the reverse order. Okay. So with my son, who's 8 years old, I often get in fights about technology at the moment, iPads and Nintendo Switches and that kind of thing. And if I said to him something like, look, mate, if you don't put your plate on the sink, I'm going to turn off the iPad. Like, it just comes across as a threat. Yeah, if you're not late again, you've just confirmed that you're able to be on time. If you're late again, then I'm going to end your employment, or I'll need to consider a performance management process, or whatever the threat is that you're wanting to make, right? It's a threat. But what we want to do is to put the focus on the positive behavior, the thing that we want them to do. So I would do it in the same way you did, Chris, but I would flip the positive and the negative consequences. With my son, I say, if you don't put your plate on the sink, I'm going to have to turn off the iPad. Or if you can pause your show and put your plate on the sink, I'll give you an extra 5 minutes. So I'm making it a choice. I'm saying to them, if you're late again, it's effectively going to mean that we can't continue using you as part of the team at Blind, or, whatever the arrangement is that you're engaging them with. Or if you can make sure that you're more consistent, showing up on time, and I'll be paying attention to it over the next few weeks, then you won't need to worry about any of those issues happening. So I'd probably still do the threat in exactly as firm a way as you did, but I would end with, or if you can make sure that you're on time consistently, this is the better outcome for you. Yeah.
So if you can make it on time, then we'd be happy to keep you on the team.
It might even just be you won't risk losing your job.
Okay.
Like, what was the thing that you threatened them with? Was it that you would fire them, or that you would reduce their
I just
hours, or
have to
that
let
you
you
would,
go.
yeah, let them go? So
Yeah.
then that would be, or if you can make sure that you're on time consistently, then we're happy to continue working with you. And to be frank, that's something that we're all hoping for.
Yeah. I like that. Okay. Good twist. Still
Mm.
assertive, very clear.
And making it a choice. And
Yeah.
you've kind of done it by saying, can you be on time? Like, you're asking for that commitment for them, so to speak. I would have just done that at the end rather than before the threat, kind of thing.
Okay.
But this is a style thing. Like, we've all got a different approach, and this certainly isn't something that's a mistake or it's wrong. In fact, the people that you're dealing with on your team might respond to your style much better than they would respond to mine or someone else's. So it's probably about experimenting. But for me,
Yeah.
when I've been in positions to give ultimatums, like with my 8-year-old son, or even with my wife when she's doing something that's really bugging me, like watching TV when I'm trying to sleep or something, look, if you keep watching TV, I'm just going to have to go and sleep in the other bed. If you can turn it off, then I'm happy to stay. But come on, I really need to get some sleep here.
I feel like this is something you might have said before.
Well, the final thing I thought it would be helpful, maybe just to touch on very briefly, Chris, was a little bit
Okay.
of information about self-care. We've talked about some of the challenges of self-regulation and keeping yourself calm and being assertive and holding the line. But the final aspect, I suppose, is how do we look after ourselves longer term? I talked about those aspects of self earlier in the conversation. And when we think about how do we care for ourselves, it's probably also those 5 different elements that we could consider. And depending on the type of work that we've been doing and the challenges that we've been facing, it might be different buckets of energy that are drained. Like, if we've been doing a lot of thinking power, then we might really enjoy hanging out with our friends and doing some emotional fun time. But if we've been doing a lot of emotional labor, like childcare, for example, or dealing with a workplace mediation, I often don't want to hang out with my friends after work. I just need quiet time to go home and do a little bit of rest. But for me, it's thinking about, what do you need? There'll be some days and some weekends when you just need rest, like physically to restore your energy. Sometimes it's more like you need a reset. You're frazzled and you're ruminating and you can't stop thinking about this, the fact that you had to fire one of your staff last week or something like that. So for you, it's changing your mind, taking your mind off that thing that's causing you stress that would be helpful. In other situations, it's finding options for recharging or even realigning with our passions and what we're aiming for and what motivates us at a more deep level. So there'll be different elements that work for all of us differently. Exercise, obviously, is incredibly helpful. It releases endorphins, which is endogenous morphine. So morphine that our body creates itself. What better option can you think of after a difficult conflict at work than a little injection of morphine, a little bit of calm to flow through your system? And the type of exercise that I often recommend is high interval intensive training. When we do that type of exercise, we elevate our heart rate and then practice calming ourselves down again. So we might sprint for 30 seconds and then walk for 30 seconds and sprint for 30 seconds and walk for 30 seconds. We're raising our nervous system, and that matches quite closely that fight or flight response that we go into when we're in conflict. So we're training our body to be better able to regulate that escalation and bring ourselves back down to balance and homeostasis. Debriefing can be incredibly helpful if you've got someone that you can talk to, especially if there's something that's sitting there in the back of your mind that you're worried about and you're not sure whether you've done the right thing or you should do something and you're not sure. Deep breathing, spending time doing positive visualization, like remembering the positive experiences that you've had in the past, like the last holiday that you had with your family or something like that, and reliving some of those good times, looking back through your memories on your phone and that kind of thing. Trying meditation, just sitting still for 10 minutes, it really does make a significant difference in terms of the way that your brain functions. It slows us down and creates space and helps us to become more aware of those reactions that are coming up as part of this perception of threat that's going on for us 24/7. Physical relaxation, getting a massage, having a bath, something like that that calms you down and makes you feel good physically. Create, I'm sure, would resonate with your audience. Like, when I'm stressed, I don't feel like picking up my guitar and playing a song, but if I can just white knuckle it through and do it, gosh, it feels good to finally get that release. And it's funny, it does almost feel like I just it expresses out of me somehow. And I think if you're a writer and graphic artist or something, you might also experience something very similar. And then thinking about the people that do fill up your bucket, that restore you after you're feeling drained. It might not be every friend that you've got, depending on the situation that you're in. It might not be every family member that's a good listener and is a good support. So choosing strategically who's going to be there for you to fill the bucket back up when you're feeling like you're a little bit drained. That often is the key, I think, to being more resilient and better able to deal with the conflict when you arrive back to work on Monday. So we don't necessarily connect the two, but for me, when I see people who are not very good at dealing with conflict at work, like they're very reactive and frazzled, they often don't do very healthy self-care habits and self-care routines as well. So, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've already got. So maybe for some of the people listening to the conversation, this could be an opportunity to experiment with a different self-care strategy and see what works for them. So I don't necessarily have a view of like, this is the right and wrong way to do it. It really is just about finding something that fits for each person. It's a personal thing. And ultimately, we're all wired slightly differently. We're going to have different things that we perceive as threats and different things that work for us for calming ourselves down and restoring energy at the end of the day as well. Yeah, so those were the main areas that I thought might be helpful to cover, Chris. But how does that all sit with you?
I thought that was wonderful, Simon. I've enjoyed it. I love hearing your perspective on how to self-regulate and how to de-escalate and then also how to be assertive without being an a-hole, because that's what a lot of people worry about.
Yeah.
So they wind up defaulting to the opposite, which is they get trampled on all the time. And I'm sure our audience is going to get a kick out of this. And if they want to go deeper with you, where should we send them?
Well, my podcast is called Conflict Skills, and I've got episodes on most of the different topics that we've covered today, as well as a whole bunch of other information too. So that would be a good place to start. My YouTube channel's at Simon Goode, and my website is just simongoode.com. And that surname is Goode, Goody. So Simon Goody, but it's pronounced
Simon
Good.
Goode.
So SIMONGOODE.com.
And if you're listening to this on the podcast, we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. So check those out. I know very rarely do you ever do that, but do that. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put the notes and the links in the description below. So go check out the description. Simon, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing with us some of your wisdom and your expertise around mediation and conflict resolution.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.